Have you ever felt like, no matter how hard you try, finding a real connection with someone seems impossible? Especially as you get older? As we age, the search for love and companionship can often feel like an endless journey, filled with disappointment, confusion, and misunderstandings. But what if I told you the real challenge isn't just about meeting the right person? It's about coming to terms with how much of our expectations are shaped by society's evolving views on relationships and aging. In this video, I'm going to share my personal story about love, loss, and the unexpected truths I discovered about relationships as a 62-year-old man. After years of living in a comfortable, happy marriage, I found myself alone, yearning to find someone to share my life with again. But what happened when I ventured into the world of arranged dates and met potential partners? Was I truly ready for love, or was I simply clinging to old ideals that no longer fit my life? I'm going to walk you through my journey, sharing the shocking realizations I had during my matchmaking experience, and how those moments led me to a life-changing decision. You'll see why, despite seemingly having everything figured out on paper, the path to companionship is far more complicated and unpredictable than we often think. Stick with me until the end, because I'm going to reveal the key lessons I've learned about love, companionship, and what truly matters in your later years. Whether you're looking for a partner or learning to embrace your independence, these lessons can help guide you to happiness and fulfillment, no matter where you are in life. So, why should you keep watching? If you've ever felt like love and companionship were just out of reach, or if you're struggling to make peace with the inevitable changes life brings, then this video is for you. Stay tuned to find out why sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most fulfilling decisions. If you're not already subscribed, I'd recommend doing so and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. Your support means so much to me, and if you've enjoyed this video, you can help me continue spreading these valuable lessons by liking and sharing them with others. And before we dive in, if you enjoy the topic of today's video, please comment 1 to let me know. If you think there's room for improvement or if you'd like to see something different, leave a comment with 0. Your feedback is incredibly helpful as I work to create content that resonates with you. Now, let's get started. Let me open my heart and share a little piece of my story with you. I'm 62 years old now, a retired teacher, and each month, I receive a pension of about $400. I live with my son, and while I'm grateful for his support, it's not the same as the bustling, energetic days of my earlier years. My grandchildren are off at school during the day, and the house settles into a quiet routine. It's peaceful, yes, but at times, that peace feels like a void, a silence that amplifies the loneliness I never quite expected. After decades of teaching, raising a family, and living a full life, the quietness often leaves me feeling restless, almost adrift. I never thought I'd be here, at a stage in life where the days blur into one another, and excitement feels like a distant memory. I have to admit, I wasn't ready for this. I missed the energy, the purpose, the feeling of being needed and wanted. So, I decided to try something I never thought I would: matchmaking. I thought maybe, just maybe, it could add a little spark back into my life. I hoped it would give me companionship, something to look forward to beyond the endless hours of quiet afternoons. But after only 2 arranged dates, I found myself completely shocked and disheartened. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a gut-wrenching realization that, no matter how hard I tried, all the women seemed to be looking for the same thing, and nothing felt real. They all had the same expectations and the same surface-level traits, and I felt like I was walking through a sea of generic conversations and hollow gestures. It was as though the connection I longed for, something deep and authentic, was simply not possible anymore. I felt lost and exhausted by the effort, and the more I tried to push myself into something that didn't feel right, the more I longed for the peace of being alone. And that's when the truth hit me. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I realized I was far more comfortable with solitude than forcing myself into a relationship that didn't feel genuine. The quiet, while lonely at times, offered me something that these fleeting moments with strangers didn't. It offered me freedom, reflection, and the opportunity to rediscover myself without expectations. So, after much reflection and soul-searching, I made a choice. I chose to embrace my own company, to savor the solitude, and to stop searching for a connection that I wasn't sure was out there for me anymore. It was an incredibly freeing decision, though it wasn't without its moments of sadness. When I think about my past, I can't help but smile. I had a truly wonderful marriage. My wife and I shared so many beautiful years, years filled with laughter, love, and an undeniable bond. I was the one who made most of the decisions at home, and that was the way we liked it. There was no tension, no power struggle. We had an understanding, a deep mutual respect. I had the freedom to buy what I wanted, and I never once questioned it because I trusted her completely. We communicated, we worked together, and for the most part, I was the decision maker, but it never felt like a burden. It felt like part of who I was, part of the harmony we built together. Our life was full, and I believed with all my heart that I had everything I could ever want. But then, everything changed. 2 years ago, my wife passed away unexpectedly, and with that loss, a piece of me shattered. The grief was so intense that I found myself clinging to anything that could offer me even the smallest bit of solace. For me, that solace came in the form of daily exercise. It became my lifeline, my way of navigating the pain, of just making it through the day without completely losing myself. Now, as I sit here reflecting on it all, I realize that life, as beautiful as it is, often comes with unexpected twists and turns. While I once sought companionship again, I've come to understand that sometimes peace comes in the form of quiet acceptance, of choosing to be content with the love that's already shaped you. Maybe that's the lesson I was meant to learn. And now, in the silence, I find comfort. Not in the search for something new, but in the quiet understanding that I am enough, just as I am. The first year after my wife passed away, I found myself lost in a sea of grief and uncertainty. My friends, with all their good intentions, kept urging me to find a new partner. They introduced me to several women, trying to play matchmaker, but every time, I turned them down. If I'm being honest, I wasn't ready to meet anyone new, nor did I have any desire to. My heart was still grieving the loss of my wife, and I couldn't bring myself to even think about opening it to another person. I was stuck, tethered to the past, holding on to memories that felt too precious to let go of. The idea of someone else stepping into her place, even just emotionally, seemed unimaginable. I just wasn't ready for that. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment one below to let me know that you are still here with me. So, I made a decision, one that, in hindsight, seems like the most natural thing to do at the time. I moved in with my son. My decision was more than just practical. It was emotional. I found comfort in being surrounded by family, particularly my grandchildren. They filled my days with laughter and chaos, and in their way, gave me a sense of purpose again. Watching them grow, seeing them learn, and just being a part of their lives brought me a certain kind of joy that I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't without its costs. Living with my son meant that I was no longer living for myself alone. I was eating his food, occupying his space, and contributing in small ways where I could. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I felt guilty for relying on him so much. My son is doing his best to support his own family, and the thought that he had to carry me, too, weighed heavily on my heart. He works full-time, and his days are already filled with stress. The last thing I wanted was to add to his burdens. So, I did what I could. Every month, I would chip in, buying groceries and helping with the bills, despite my pension barely covering my own needs. But it was important to me that I wasn't just a burden. I wanted to be a part of the solution, even if it was in small ways. As time passed, it became clear that living alone just wasn't going to be a practical option anymore. My son's schedule was packed with work, and my grandchildren were at school during the day. My solitude started to feel heavier, the walls closing in around me. It wasn't that I didn't love being with family, but I felt the sting of my loneliness creeping in. So, after much reflection, I realized it was time to consider something I'd avoided for so long: finding a partner. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully open my heart again, but I decided to give it a shot. I reached out to a matchmaker, explaining that I was looking for someone younger, someone who wasn't burdened by financial struggles, someone who had a gentle heart. I wanted someone who could understand my situation, not just emotionally but practically, too. The thought of starting a new relationship was daunting, especially after everything I'd been through. I've always been strong and independent, both in my career and in my personal life. But I feared that being with someone might come with its own set of challenges. I didn't want to bring issues into a new relationship that would cause tension or distance. I needed to make sure any potential partner could accept my situation. And, just as importantly, that she would be willing to support my son in some way too. The matchmaker listened carefully, and soon enough, she introduced me to Sarah. Sarah was 43, divorced, with a 6-year-old daughter. She worked in a public sector job, earning about $400 a month, and she owned her own home and car. When I first heard about Sarah, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. She was 19 years younger than me, and I thought to myself, maybe this could work. Maybe she's the one who could bring light into my life again. As I learned more about her, I couldn't help but feel optimistic. She seemed like someone who could understand the complexities of life, someone who could balance the demands of raising a child and managing her finances. I hoped that, if we got along well, I might not need to look for anyone else. Maybe this was the second chance I'd been waiting for, not just for myself, but for my son and my family, too. The matchmaker had arranged for us to meet at a small, cozy cafe that seemed to perfectly match the calm and thoughtful nature of the conversation I was hoping to have. I remember sitting down with Sarah, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The moment I saw her, I was struck by an immediate sense of warmth, something intangible but powerful. She was undeniably beautiful, with an aura that went beyond just physical appearance. Her youthfulness was not merely a reflection of age, but of an energy that seemed to radiate from her. There was a grace in her every movement, a confidence in her smile, and a depth in her eyes that made me feel both comfortable and intrigued all at once. As we started talking, it felt like the world outside us faded away. Her communication was fluid and easy, and her ability to listen was remarkable. She made me feel heard and understood with every word. We exchanged pleasantries at first, and then she asked a question that made me pause. "What kind of woman are you looking for?" The question wasn't unexpected, but it carried weight. I thought for a moment, searching my heart for the right words to explain what I truly wanted. I wasn't just looking for someone who met my superficial criteria. I wanted a connection, something deeper. And so, I replied, I'm hoping to find someone who is gentle, kind, someone who has a tender heart and knows how to love with compassion. To my surprise, Sarah nodded immediately, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Her eyes softened as she shared her thoughts, and I felt as though I was hearing something profound. "You know," she said, her voice steady and sincere, "a woman's gentleness is often shaped by the man she's with. If a man offers enough love and warmth, a woman will naturally become more gentle. She will mirror that love and tenderness. But if a man is cold, distant, emotionally unavailable, no matter how warm the woman might be on her own, she'll begin to reflect his emotional distance." Her words resonated with me in a way I hadn't expected. I had never thought about relationships in quite those terms before, but it made perfect sense. The idea that the dynamic between two people could shape their emotional responses and behavior so profoundly felt like a revelation. It made me reflect on my past relationships and wonder how much of my emotional state had been influenced by the people I was with. Sarah's insight opened my eyes to a new way of seeing the potential for emotional growth and healing within a partnership. Our conversation then turned to more practical matters. We began discussing finances, an area that always seemed to bring a sense of unease whenever it came up in conversation. I knew that someone as accomplished and successful as Sarah would likely have a very different perspective on money than I did. She was a woman who had built a life of stability, security, and independence. It was clear she wasn't looking for someone to financially support her. I felt a subtle sense of nervousness creep in as I realized that finances could easily become a point of contention between us. I didn't want to disappoint her, yet I knew I had to be honest. When Sarah asked about my pension and how I spent my money, I didn't hesitate to share. I explained that most of my pension went toward supporting my children, helping them with daily expenses, paying for groceries, assisting with household bills, and ensuring my grandchildren had everything they needed. At the end of the month, after all my responsibilities were met, I had barely $400 left for myself. The reality of my financial situation was humbling, but I felt it was important for her to understand. I didn't want her to have any false expectations, nor did I want to put myself in a position where I was judged for something I couldn't change. As I shared this, I noticed a subtle change in Sarah's expression. Her eyes, which had been warm and engaging moments before, now seemed distant, calculating, as if weighing my words carefully. The warmth in her face slowly began to fade, replaced by a coldness I hadn't anticipated. I could feel the shift in the air between us, the tension of reality settling in. She didn't even try to hide her reaction. With a sharpness that caught me off guard, she replied, her tone more serious than before, "If the remaining money you have is barely enough to live on, then I don't need a man's income to find a husband. I'm financially independent, and I don't need to be supporting a man with my own money. What could I possibly do with just $400 a month? It's not even enough for necessities." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I could sense the finality in her voice. It was clear that Sarah wasn't interested in anything less than a partner who could offer a certain level of financial stability. At that moment, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Shame, disappointment, and frustration all tangled up together. I had hoped that Sarah might see beyond the numbers, beyond the practicalities, and perhaps understand that there was more to me than just my bank balance. But in her eyes, the financial aspects seemed to overshadow everything else. It was clear that she wasn't looking for someone to share financial burdens with, but rather someone who could offer emotional support, companionship, and love. She continued, explaining that she wasn't seeking a man to help her financially. She was already well off. She owned her own house, her car, and had her financial future secured. Her ex-husband, she told me, was still taking care of their daughter's expenses. What Sarah truly longed for was emotional comfort. She was looking for someone to fill the void in her heart, not someone who would bring further financial strain into her life. I sat there, absorbing her words, trying to process what I was hearing. On one hand, I could understand her point of view. She had worked hard to establish herself and to become independent, and it made sense that she wouldn't want to compromise on that independence. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel that our differences in circumstances had created a gap between us, a gap that no amount of emotional connection could bridge. I understood that she wasn't looking for someone who needed her financially, but I also realized that her version of a partnership didn't align with mine. As Sarah spoke, I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness settle in my chest. It wasn't just the disappointment of not meeting her expectations financially. It was the realization that sometimes, despite the best of intentions, two people's lives can be so different that it becomes impossible to move forward together. We were speaking the same language of love and companionship, but the words were hollow when it came to the practical realities of life. And yet, despite the sting of that moment, I also couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Sarah. She knew exactly what she wanted, and she was not willing to settle for anything less. Her clarity and self-assurance were qualities I deeply respected, even though they made the reality of our potential relationship painfully clear. There would be no room for compromise in her world. As the conversation ended, I left with a heavy heart, torn between respect for her strength and the undeniable sense that we were too different to make it work. The emotional connection that I felt at the beginning was still there, but it was now overshadowed by the awareness that financial compatibility was more than just a detail. It was a fundamental part of what Sarah needed in a relationship. And so, despite the tender words and the deep conversation we had shared, I knew that we were walking away from each other, not because we didn't care, but because our paths in life simply didn't align. I left the cafe with a sense of melancholy, but also a newfound understanding of the complexities of relationships. It's not just love that binds people together. It's also the practical aspects of life, the day-to-day realities that shape who we are and how we connect. When the matchmaker saw the growing discomfort between Sarah and me, it was clear to her that the evening was spiraling into an awkward, unrepairable mess. Her face reflected a mix of concern and determination as she tried, once again, to steer the conversation in a direction that might ease the tension. But it was futile. No matter how much she prodded us with small talk, no matter how many gentle nudges she offered, the gap between Sarah and me only seemed to widen. Every attempt to connect felt more forced than the last, and soon, even the polite smiles couldn't hide the unease in the air. It wasn't just the silences, it was the palpable distance, the realization that we were simply two people who had no business being in each other's lives. The harder Sarah tried to speak, the more it became evident that we were not on the same wavelength, and by the time dessert arrived, it was painfully obvious that this date had failed, and there was no turning back. I had hoped for something better. At the start, I was genuinely excited about meeting Sarah. She had all the qualities I thought I could connect with. She was sharp, confident, and radiated an effortless charm. I had admired her from the moment I heard her name. But as the evening wore on, something began to gnaw at me, a growing sense that I was fooling myself by believing we could have anything lasting. Deep down, I knew that no matter how much I liked her, my reality simply wasn't enough for someone like her. My finances, which were already stretched thin by the needs of my children and grandchildren, would never measure up to what Sarah likely expected from a partner. And that hurt more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't about not wanting her in my life. It was about being painfully aware that I couldn't provide her with the life she deserved. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. At this stage in my life, I had made peace with certain things. I wasn't interested in grand adventures or exotic trips. My dreams now were simpler, quieter. My children and grandchildren were my focus. I wanted to provide for them, to see them grow and thrive. They were my legacy, my world, and that, I knew, would always come first. I had spent years building a life of responsibilities, of duty, and while I longed for companionship and love, I could never let go of the need to protect and care for my family. I couldn't change that, no matter how lonely or empty I might sometimes feel. It wasn't that I didn't like Sarah. She was wonderful, and I respected her immensely, but we were on different paths, with different priorities. It was clear to me now that this wasn't a match made in the stars. It was simply fate, a gentle reminder that my journey was still unfolding and that I hadn't yet found the person who could truly walk beside me, embracing all the complexities of life at this stage. After the date, as I drove home in silence, I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. When I spoke to the matchmaker, I didn't mince words. I told her that I didn't think I could meet with Sarah again. I felt the sting of disappointment, but also a sense of relief. I had made the right choice. It wasn't just that the chemistry was off, it was that deep, unspoken understanding that no matter how much I might like someone, it wouldn't matter if they didn't feel the same way. I couldn't force something that wasn't meant to be, no matter how much I longed for connection. So, I accepted the reality of the situation. I had to let go of what might have been and focus on moving forward. Just when I thought I could close the chapter on this part of my life, the matchmaker reached out again. She had another prospect in mind. Her name was Janet, and she was 52 years old. She worked at an insurance company, earning a comfortable monthly income of around $3,400. At first, I didn't know what to think. I was hesitant, still carrying the weight of my previous experience. But as she spoke more about Janet, something stirred in me, a glimmer of hope mixed with a hint of nervousness. Janet sounded different from Sarah. She was younger, vibrant, and successful in her own right. She had a timeless beauty and a sophistication that seemed to radiate from every word the matchmaker said. When I finally met Janet, the instant I saw her, I felt a rush of emotions I wasn't prepared for. The first thing that struck me was how effortlessly she carried herself. Janet looked every bit the part of someone who had aged gracefully, with a calm, collected elegance that seemed almost otherworldly. She stood out in the crowd with her smooth, flawless skin that seemed to glow even in the dim lighting of the restaurant. Her wavy hair framed her face like it had been styled by a professional, and her chic sunglasses, even indoors, only added to the aura of confidence she exuded. But what made me pause was the nagging feeling of insecurity that washed over me. As I looked at her, I couldn't help but compare myself to the woman standing before me. Janet looked like someone in her late 30s, not someone who had crossed the threshold of 50. She radiated youth and vitality, and I couldn't help but wonder, what would she see in someone like me? I had always prided myself on being self-assured, but standing there in front of Janet, I felt every ounce of my age, every imperfection. How could a woman like her, with her poise and youthful appearance, possibly be interested in a man like me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in her world. What could I offer her, other than the quiet, modest life I had built for myself? Was that enough for someone who seemed to have it all? My heart raced as I tried to push these thoughts aside, but they lingered, reminding me of my insecurities and my fears. But then, just as quickly, I reminded myself that I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for someone who could accept me as I was, flaws and all. And maybe, just maybe, Janet could see something in me that I had yet to discover in myself. Could she? Would she? I wasn't sure, but I couldn't ignore the possibility that she might be the one to change everything. In the past, I had always prided myself on being honest, transparent, and straightforward in my conversations. I believed that sincerity was the key to real connections. Whether in casual chats or deep, meaningful discussions, I never hesitated to speak my mind. I didn't worry too much about the impression I made because, to me, authenticity was far more important than being liked. My approach was simple. Say what you mean what you say, and let the chips fall where they may. But now, everything felt different. Something inside me had shifted. The weight of time and the inevitability of aging made me start questioning myself in ways I had never done before. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt the steady passage of time weighing on me. I felt invisible in a way I hadn't before, as if the person I used to be was slowly fading away, replaced by someone who wasn't quite sure where they fit in the world anymore. It wasn't just my physical appearance that had changed, it was my mindset, too. I found myself dwelling on the notion that people might see me as too old, as though I no longer had a place in the world of new beginnings, of dating, of being desired. The thought of being rejected, of no one wanting me simply because of my age, was too much to bear. I began to imagine that all those years of life experience, the wisdom I had gathered, might be overshadowed by the lines on my face and the slowing of my steps. The fear of loneliness, of being overlooked and discarded, gripped me tightly. I convinced myself that it was best to simply let go of the idea of dating altogether. Let go of the possibility of ever finding someone to share those quiet moments with again. I tried to tell myself that I didn't need it, that I was better off embracing the solitude, but deep down, I knew it was a lie. It was easier to convince myself that the idea of dating was behind me, that it was something I could no longer strive for. When I met Janet, I could feel the nerves in my chest tightening, threatening to escape as panic. Here was a woman, beautiful, successful, confident, who seemed to have everything I once dreamed of. She was the kind of person I thought I had no chance with, a vision of elegance and grace that made me feel small and inadequate. I sat across from her, but the conversation felt forced, as if every word I spoke was just another reminder of the growing chasm between us. Before Janet even had the chance to take off her sunglasses, I had already concocted my escape plan. I wasn't going to let myself sit there, feeling the sting of inadequacy, only to watch as the distance between us became more and more evident. I quickly made up an excuse. My phone had run out of battery, and I had to leave. It was a feeble excuse, but it seemed believable enough. After all, my life was always busy. There was never a moment when I didn't have something to do, a place to be, someone to meet. So, leaving seemed like the only way to avoid facing the truth of what I feared, being left behind. My heart raced as I prepared to make a quick exit, eager to flee before the discomfort could settle in any deeper. But, of course, the matchmaker noticed. She wasn't fooled by my excuse and pulled me back gently but firmly. "Janet has a good impression of you," she said, her voice soft but filled with an undeniable urgency. "You should talk to her a bit longer. You're doing yourself a disservice by leaving now." I felt my stomach drop. The pressure of her words hung heavy in the air. I had already made up my mind to retreat, to leave this meeting and disappear into the comfort of my world, where I didn't have to face the vulnerability that came with attempting to connect with someone. I let out a deep, exhausted sigh, the kind that spoke volumes of the emotional weight I carried. Despite my desire to escape, I couldn't bring myself to hurt the matchmaker's feelings. She was only trying to help. And what if she was right? What if I was running away from something that could change my life? What if, just maybe, Janet could see something in me that I couldn't see in myself? I didn't know, but I agreed to stay, reluctantly, unsure, but still holding on to a shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I felt. Janet smiled at me warmly when I sat back down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being kind to her out of obligation, not because I believed in any potential for a connection. How could someone like her, so poised, so accomplished, so beautiful, ever look at me and see something worth investing in? I had resigned myself to the belief that my days of dating were long gone. How could someone with such high standards, someone who had built her life on accomplishments and beauty, ever be interested in someone like me? I was convinced I was simply too far past my prime to be of interest to her. My insecurities drowned out any flicker of optimism. I spoke to Janet, but my words felt empty, like I was just going through the motions. Then, as I listened to her, Janet said something that completely shocked me. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made my heart beat faster. "You're not too old for me," she said, looking at me directly. "I don't see age the way others do." For a moment, I froze. Did I hear her right? A part of me wanted to dismiss her words as some sort of politeness, but her sincerity was undeniable. She didn't see me as someone who was too old. She didn't see me as someone who had been forgotten by time. For the first time in a long while, a small flicker of hope sparked in my chest. It was fragile, but it was there. And for a moment, I dared to believe that perhaps the passage of time didn't erase the possibility of connection, of love, of partnership. But then, as if to bring me back to reality, Janet continued speaking. She shared that while age wasn't a concern for her, she did have very specific requirements when it came to finding a partner. She had learned, through her journey, not to compromise on the things that truly mattered to her. Her standards were high, and she knew exactly what she needed from someone in a relationship. Her words made me pause. They made me think about all the things I had believed about myself, all the self-doubt I had carried with me for years. Here was a woman who saw something in me, but at the same time, she was clear about her expectations. And that, her honesty and clarity, struck a chord in me. It made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I had more to offer than I had ever given myself credit for. Despite my fears, despite the years of feeling invisible, there was still hope. There was still the possibility of finding someone who could see beyond the surface and appreciate the person I had become, not just the number of years I had lived. The matchmaker, with an evident sense of curiosity, leaned in, eager to delve deeper into Janet's background. Her questions weren't just casual. They seemed carefully crafted to uncover the kind of person Janet was, as if she were testing the waters for a potential match. Janet, however, had her answer ready, almost as if she had rehearsed it 100 times over. She told the matchmaker that she had a stable, well-paying job, a beautiful home in a desirable neighborhood, and a car that she was proud of. She spoke about her financial independence, how she was self-sufficient, and had built a comfortable life for herself. This was the bedrock of her identity. Janet wasn't just successful. She was secure, independent, and had the kind of material stability that many dream of achieving. To her, this wasn't just an accomplishment. It was a non-negotiable prerequisite for any relationship. As she spoke, there was no room for ambiguity in her words. She had clear and unshakable requirements for a partner, and it was as though she was setting the terms of the relationship from the very beginning. She wasn't interested in a partner who couldn't match her lifestyle, her level of financial security, or her material ambitions. It almost seemed as though the emotional and personal aspects of a relationship were secondary, or at least secondary to the kind of financial and material stability she expected. I had encountered this kind of mindset before, particularly with friends who had tried to set me up with potential partners. They often spoke of financial security, a comfortable lifestyle, and material compatibility. I had always felt that something was missing from these conversations, something far more intangible and meaningful. Yet, hearing it again, so plainly and directly from Janet, hit me harder than I expected. There was an overwhelming sense of emptiness in her vision of love, and I found myself quietly grappling with the disconnect. I sat there, listening intently, trying to absorb the full weight of her words. The way Janet described her ideal life left no room for negotiation or change. She wanted a life that was better, she said, upgraded, improved, defined by financial and material success. A decent house, an engagement, security. These were her requirements. And if they weren't met, then there was nothing more to discuss. As I listened to her, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of sadness deep inside. I had always believed that a relationship, any meaningful relationship, should be built on shared values, emotional depth, and mutual respect for one another's lives and experiences. But here was Janet, unwavering in her belief that the key to happiness was rooted in possessions, status, and an external sense of success. It was like watching someone build a fortress around themselves, keeping out anything that couldn't be measured by money or material wealth. The idea of a better life seemed to be wrapped up in things rather than feelings, in outward appearances rather than inner connection. And that realization hurt more than I had expected. I let out a long, weary sigh, the weight of her words sinking in. With a sense of reluctance, I turned to Janet and spoke, my voice quieter than I intended. I can't accept your key points, I said, trying to explain my stance. It's not about money. It's just that I'm 62 now. I don't have the same financial freedom I once did. I've got a pension, but that's about it. The truth hung in the air between us, and I knew immediately that this wasn't going to be the connection either of us hoped for. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. There was a brief, awkward silence, and I could feel the tension growing like an invisible wall rising between us. The matchmaker, ever the optimist, tried again to salvage the situation, suggesting that perhaps we could find some middle ground, some way to move forward. But it was clear, almost painfully clear, that there was no way to bridge the gap. Janet's stance was firm. Her vision of what a relationship should be was set, and there was no room for anything less than what she deemed acceptable. As the conversation dwindled to a standstill, I found myself deep in thought, reflecting on what had just transpired. I began to compare Janet's outlook with the conversation I had had earlier with Sarah. The contrast was stark, and it struck me like a punch to the gut. I was left grappling with a growing sense of confusion and disillusionment. Why had relationships become so transactional, and so focused on financial gain? Why were so many people today, particularly women, so fixated on material wealth as the measure of a successful life? Had love, trust, and emotional connection become secondary to the things we could own, the money we could accumulate, and the lifestyle we could afford? Wasn't a relationship supposed to be about something more, about emotional intimacy, shared experiences, and a deep sense of partnership? I began to question myself and my place in this world that seemed to value possessions over people. Was I too old now to find someone who still valued the things I held dear? Trust, companionship, mutual respect? Had I become outdated, irrelevant, a relic of a time when love was still defined by emotional connection rather than financial success? I couldn't help but wonder, in the quiet of my thoughts, if there was still someone out there who could look beyond my financial situation, and who could see me for who I truly was. Was it possible to find a partner who would appreciate me, not for what I had, but for who I had become over the years? Could I ever find someone who would love me as I aged, for the depth of my heart, the strength of my character, and the richness of my life experiences, rather than the balance in my bank account? The more I thought about it, the more the weight of the situation settled in. I had always believed that love was something profound, something real. But it seemed that, in today's world, many people were no longer interested in the kinds of love that could withstand the test of time, the kind that was built on trust, respect, and emotional intimacy. Instead, it felt as if the pursuit of love had become something shallow, something transactional. And that realization stung more than I had anticipated. Could I ever find someone who understood that real connection went beyond money and materialism, beyond the superficial trappings of success? Or had I become invisible, lost in a world that cared more about what you had than who you truly were? I sat with these questions for a long time, feeling the ache of their weight deep in my heart. It was painful, this realization, and I wondered whether true love had become a rare and fleeting thing, something too precious for many to appreciate anymore. Would I ever find it again? Or had I become too old, too invisible, to experience the kind of connection that I had always longed for? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unresolved, as I was left to ponder my place in this new world, one that seemed so different from the one I had once known. As I reflect on everything we've talked about today, I realize just how deeply personal the search for love and connection can be, especially as we age. We've seen how different perspectives on relationships, whether it's a focus on material security or deeper emotional bonds, can shape the way we experience life and love. And perhaps, in these reflections, there's something each of us can learn about our values, desires, and what we truly seek in a partner or companion. So, I want to ask you, what have you learned from today's story? What resonates with you? Is there something you've realized about the way we view love, materialism, or emotional connection? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What's one thing you've learned today that you will bring to practice in your own life moving forward? If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Your support means the world to us.